This summer, Rebecca and I went to New York City for the wedding of my friend Doug and his wife Mallory. Doug and I were good friends in college, and we've kept in touch on and off over the past 15 years. That's a little more difficult to do when you go from living in the same apartment and seeing each other multiple times a day to being spread out across the country, going to different graduate schools. He had a stint in the Navy. We've always lived multiple states apart. But even so, when the invitation came in the mail inviting us to Doug and Mallory's wedding, we had no choice but to go. When we arrived, we checked into our hotel, and we were told that we would meet the wedding party in the restaurant in the lobby of the hotel. And at that moment, I had that feeling that I'm sure many of you have experienced as well. When you're about to see a good friend who you haven't seen for a while, you have this feeling of nostalgia, that you hope that you can relive a lot of the great memories of times that you shared. There's this hopeful anticipation that this time together will create similar memories in your relationship. But there's also a little bit of nervousness. If it's been several years, are we still going to connect the way that we used to? And so we got down to the lobby, and there we were waiting, and first to arrive were Drury and Timothy. We hadn't seen them since their wedding in Texas 5 years before. Then after them, Robert and Julia arrived, and then finally, the bride and groom, Doug and Mallory, came. Each time someone came into the restaurant, we broke out into wide smiles, embraced each other with big bear hugs, and spoke over top one another, catching up on kids and life and work. You've had these experiences too, right? Some of you have told me that you have annual trips with your college buddies, and you share who's in charge of organizing and making the reservations, and you've decided who among the friends should never be tasked with that job based on when they had the chance to lead it. Others of you meet up at the annual football game or the basketball weekend, or still others have a big family reunion from time to time where you gather at the old home place with generations spilling out over the lawn and filling up all the rooms of the house. So in my office, I have a painting. It's a watercolor of the Halliburton Tower of Rhodes College. I don't have that because I love collegiate Gothic architecture. It's there because it symbolizes particular relationships that formed while I was a student at that school. Relationships like with Doug and Drury and Timothy and Robert and others that have shaped who I understand myself to be and who I am in relationship with other folks. You all have these too from the holy places where you gather, mementos, Christmas ornaments, other reminders of a place, but it's not really about the place. It's about the people that you knew who have shaped you in that place. And so in our reading today from Ezra, we have this correspondence, this artifact for the rebuilding of the project of Jerusalem and the temple. Ezra is the priest in charge of this project. And he gets this letter from the king of Persia, Artaxerxes. So a little backstory here. In 587 BC, the empire of Babylon invades Judah, destroys Jerusalem, tears down the temple, and hauls off a lot of the wealthy and important people to exile in Babylon. And they languish there under the Babylonian Empire for several decades until Cyrus of Persia conquers the kingdom of Babylon, and they become part of the Persian Empire. Cyrus is not just talked about in ancient textbooks, he's also talked about in the Bible. The prophets of Israel talk about Cyrus as a hero, even though he's not from Israel. And they do that because his policy towards vassal states was far more welcoming than the Babylonians. The Persian Empire's stance was, if your nation and your people aren't causing us any problems as your overlords, we're not going to do you any harm. So there was a lot more freedom to exercise your life. And so it's under Cyrus that these former exiles from Judah and their descendants, their children, are allowed to return home and to rebuild their life together in the covenant way of God. As long as they don't start a war with Persia, as long as they pay their taxes, they can otherwise live their life together basically as they wish. Now, that's a tricky situation because that doesn't have that same genuine resonance of being people who have the promised land, because it's not really yours anymore. It belongs to Persia. And yes, you have a king on your throne, but that king actually has to answer to more important king in another land. And yet it still is, in a sense, a homecoming. It's enough to begin again, to start over, to establish life once more. And now, the reign of Cyrus ends in 530 BC, and Artaxerxes, who we hear about today, doesn't come to power until 465. That's about 70 years. So this rebuilding effort, this restoration effort, is rather slow going, 70 years in the making. And so Ezra has negotiated these international diplomacy measures with the king of Persia in order to get permission and financial support to go back and work on the construction of the temple. It has taken patient persistence for a long time to get the people to this day. It has required creativity and a host of different leaders to guide them to this moment when they might restore their covenant ways in the promised land. The letter of the king, then, is a memento that signifies the importance of a place and provides clear support that the people can gather once again in their land. It's a homecoming, a reunion, a return to life. These folks have endured terrible loss, devastation, sorrow, hopelessness. But now at last the word has come, the invitation has arrived. They can go back home with all that mixture of excitement and nervousness, like old classmates reuniting or members of the same family across generations who haven't seen one another since the last wedding or the last funeral. And that will be different. This isn't the first temple, after all. They're rebuilding a new temple. And they're not an independent nation. International politics has shifted. The structure of their own government has changed. The citizens that are coming back, they're new, they're inexperienced in the ways of God, and yet they trust that within that sacred place of the temple and the city, they can establish a way of faithfulness that will provide them with a vision for God's will for their life. Over these past 2 years, we've experienced a season that has felt somewhat like an exile. I don't want to draw a direct parallel to what ancient Israel endured, but in our own way. It was 2 years ago, really, about this week, that we had our last normal Sunday together as a church. We've dealt with live-streamed services, social distance and masking, disinfectant sprays. We've had Zoom gatherings, outdoor meetings, parking lot fellowship dinners, confirmation around fire pits, strategic mission endeavors to be carried out so that nobody's at risk of infecting someone else. It's been challenging. Sometimes it's tested the limits of our patience, our creativity, our ability to endure one another. But I also think it's revealed something about us, at least it has to me, which is the insufficiency of trying to be the church in a scattered and exilic way, as a digitally gathered body, as a community that's always having to ask the question, should we be together? How far apart should we be? What should we be wearing? Should we be outside, inside? Now, these have been important measures. We've needed them. We've needed to navigate them. It's been absolutely essential to do so. But I think we can confess we're not our best disciples of Jesus Christ when these are the questions in the front of our mind. When we're removed from sanctuary and classrooms, where we're separated from worship and physical engagement with one another in these rhythms of faith and life that help us to remain focused on God's will amidst all the chaos that surrounds us. So part of this campaign that we're asking you to commit to today is a recognition that we need a place wherein we meet with other disciples of Jesus and where we are shaped by his way in the world. Doing our best on our own isn't enough. It's at best an exilic practice. So repair, restoration, improvement of our physical facility, it's a tangible way we recognize that we need a place to come, where our lungs and our lips are formed in prayer, where our ears are tuned to listen for God's way, both here and in the world, where our mouths can taste the bread of heaven and the cup of salvation, where our hands can reach out and touch our neighbor in greeting and in comfort and in healing. We need a gathering place for our community. Our souls need it, but our bodies need it too. I'm grateful that as we make these commitments today, we are seeing significant improvement in case numbers in the COVID-19 pandemic. Locally, case numbers are plummeting. Hospitalizations are down. Deaths are declining as well. Might it be that we are on the precipice of returning to essentially a normal life in just a few more days? I believe it is so. But I also don't want us to think that we're just going to be going back to before. This political nature of this pandemic has harmed people who have had close friendships, and we wonder how those can be repaired. We're worn down. I don't see folks out on the streets celebrating. COVID cases are down. New CDC guidance. We don't have to wear masks everywhere. Hooray! No, we're exhausted. We're hopeful, yes, but we're so tired of evaluating these policies and practices. I think a lot of us, we're carrying this veneer that we're normal. But if you just scratch a little bit, the rage bursts forth, the exhaustion, the tears, the frustration, or just the numb ambivalence about caring about anything in life anymore. We need time. We need healing. And then right as we're adjusting to this possible new normal life midst or post-COVID, international war breaks out, teetering national and economic stability around the world. Russia has invaded Ukraine unprovoked. What will the next days and weeks hold? There's something evil here, disorienting, foreign to us who never thought we would in our lifetimes see this form of war where one nation hostilely tries to invade and take the property of another country and its citizens. We feel viscerally the injustice. We worry about our allies, the Ukrainian citizens. And we wonder, of course, about the nuclear threat that's really always been in the background of our life since the 1950s, but rises to more front of mind in moments like this. We just want to beg, can we have a moment? Please. And then even amidst these national and global concerns, there's just the everyday things that we're all dealing with. I mean, if we've been in and out of church life over the past 2 years, you show back up and the person who sat next to you in the pew for years has died. They're not there anymore, or they've become disabled to the point that they can't make it to worship anymore. Children are grown up now, graduated, gone, left the house. People have changed jobs, moved away. Some have moved away and come back. It's been so long. And so we're wondering, do I still belong? There's a bunch of new faces around here. Who am I? What is life about that's worth living? We're dealing with these existential questions. But I believe it's in those moments, in these moments just like this, moments when the world feels uncertain and unstable, moments when our personal lives are being reshaped and reevaluated, times when family dynamics are shifting, times when we are weary and we are carrying heavy burdens, these kinds of times. There's always a temptation to just keep the cable news on in the background as a distraction or just constantly refresh my Twitter feed. There's a temptation to cut ourselves off from our families and pour ourselves into our work to distract us from our despair, or just give in to the darkness of the depression and never leave the house again, or live just with nostalgia for the good old days and no joy about the present moment. Just ignore the current reality. But the faith of our ancestors has shown us that in these times of fear and uncertainty and exhaustion, we need the holy place. We need to gather. We need the song and the word and the nourishment and the healing. We need to get out of destructive rhythms and patterns, even out of the ordinary space of home and school and work. We need the place set apart for the meeting of God. We need the space that helps us make sense of the chaos of the world and that we are not on our own. A word of hope, a word of challenge, a word of comfort. We need to hear the promise from the one who tells all those who are heavenly burdened that they can find rest. And so these pledges we make this day is part of that commitment. We need the place, the holy place, the set-apart place. We cannot endure the sorrow, the fear, the injustice, and the ever-changing realities of life without it. We devolve, we fade away, we lose ourselves. Some of you know that feeling over these past 2 years. So as the spring comes, as COVID wanes, we hope, as there's still fears ever present and worry all around, may we rediscover the importance of a place to meet the Lord. To meet the Lord with one another. To place our trust in God, who has promised to be with us even until the end of the age. Amen.